Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth radio show here at Blog Talk Radio. You can also find my work on YouTube, where I talk about politics and economics primarily. That would be YouTube/user/Tenebrous-T, Tenebrous. There's a link to my YouTube channel on my page. Here we discuss other issues related to the paranormal and conspiracy research. And today I am very happy to have with me Kris Millegan, who is the publisher at Trine Press that puts out a great selection of books, some of which I will just give you a brief glancing of right here. A book by Judith Vary Baker, Me and Lee, How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose, Lee Harvey Oswald. Dr. Mary's Monkey by Edward T. Haslam. America's Nazi Secret by John Loftus. The Last Circle, Danny Casolaro's investigation into the Inslaw Octopus and the Promise Software Scandal by Sherry Seymour. Radical Peace, Refusing War by William T. Hathaway. Cannabis and the Soma Solution by Chris Bennett. The King of Nepal, Life Before the Drug Wars by Joseph R. Petrie. Daniel Estulon's Shadow Masters. Also by Daniel Estulon, The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, and by H.P. Albarelli, Jr., A Terrible Mistake. And, of course, the masterpiece by Anthony G. Sutton, America's Secret Establishment, and Introduction to the Order of Skull and Bones, which we will be talking about today, from Fleshing Out Skull and Bones, Investigations into America's Most Powerful Secret Society, which Kris Millegan was involved in that book and in publishing it as well. And, of course, the Tour de Force series by Peter Levenda, Sinister Forces, three-book series on all manner of weirdness, high strangeness, conspiracy, what is called a grimoire of American political witchcraft. In any case, what can I say about Kris? Wow. Kris, I first came to be involved with Kris Millegan back in the 1990s when he was doing the conspiracy theory research list, which is still around today. It's one of the more long-lived of conspiracy research discussion lists, as it's been around for quite a long time. As I said, I was involved back in the 90s with him. Briefly a moderator there on the list. But, of course, as time goes by, we tend to drift and move, and in much the same way Kris has done so as well, eventually founding Trine Press and bringing some suppressed and hidden books to light, which would not have been published otherwise, because, as he makes clear in a couple of interviews that he has given, a lot of these authors come to him because they've been refused by other publishers to bring their information out to the public. And there is a lot of really good information in the books that he provides. But, of course, he has a story of his own about how he came to be involved in conspiracy research and where he got his inspiration to do this from. And I think a lot of this leads back to his father and his childhood. And, of course, this leads into the CIA, their involvement with drug trafficking, which, of course, has parallels to today as well, even though his particular first look into that subject was involved with Vietnam. We can see parallels today in Afghanistan as well. One of the first things that Kris did was the CIA drugs, I guess it was BBS or another one of those listing services on the internet where they talked about CIA and drugs, drug running, drug trafficking, etc. I'm sure many of you who listen will know about some of the information that's come to light about intelligence agencies being involved in drug trafficking and drug sales, etc. So we'll be keen to get some information from Kris about his getting involved in this particular area of research. So more on his dad, on the CIA and drugs, and also Skull and Bones and other secret societies and how they play a role in our culture and in America today and around the world. Many people are focused on the New World Order and all the other things that are associated with it, and certainly Skull and Bones and other secret societies are involved there as well. And we'll talk in general about conspiracy research. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to bring Kris on the line. Hopefully I won't have lost him in the transition here. Hang on one second. Kris, are you there?
Howdy, sir. Yes, I am. Thank you for having me on, and gee whiz, that was a very nice introduction. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. It was my pleasure. Please, it's really a great pleasure to have you on and to actually talk to you in person after all these years. Having known each other only by way of computer many years ago, I was very pleased to see that you had gone on to bigger and better things with Trine Press, and my first introduction to them was, of course, your book, Fleshing Out Skull and Bones, and Anthony C. Sutton's as well. And then, of course, I moved on to Peter Levenda's Sinister Forces series, which is just an amazing series of books. And I'll tell you what, you really got a real coup getting those books and having them published by Trine Day.
Well, it was very interesting, and as you stated in your introduction there, the people called me. You know, I mean, I just found it amazing. You know, I mean, we all grow up and, you know, kind of believe what they say and, you know, think, well, we live in America and we got a free press and all this and, you know, and so we're going to do something and that free press is going to take care of a bunch of stuff. Well, you know, it was Daniel Hopsicker, you know, who was the author of Burying the Boys, and you should get him on to interview. He's a very, very great fella. He helped start this too, in that he had a book and he was on our email list, CIA Drugs, and he said, you know, his book had been in New York with an agent and nobody would print it. And I says, well, you know, we've got a computer on our desk and they tell us we can make a book. And so made our first book. And Daniel came to town here. I live out in Oregon, and he came out here and he did some speaking. And you know, I watched him one time, and he basically, you know, he was going through, you know, being rejected by not having, you know, New York publish his book, and this having to do it himself with you know, and he got up on stage and he had to, you know, gave him a microphone. He had to kind of yell into the microphone, "There is no free press in America. There is no free press in America. You know, there is no free press in America," 3 times, because, you know, it was like a cathartic type experience, because he had been part of, you know, the press of America, and so he thought that, you know, and so it was a big part of his identity, and so it is really a shock to, you know, people when they find out that isn't true, and then, you know, what does it mean, and it's real insidious, because, you know, of that tube where, you know, I mean, and you know, most of the news that we get, I mean, what do we know? We just know what we read in the newspaper or read somewhere. So it's all darn interesting.
Well, as I said in the introduction, and I noticed as well that it's quite clear that we don't have a freedom of press in this country, in the sense that anybody who has some truth to impart is free to publish that. But of course, there are moneyed interests and other interests that are behind publishing, and that work very hard to keep certain things hidden and out of the public mind. So you're occupying a very important place with Trine Day, because without alternative publishing companies like yours, so much of what is real history would be hidden and lost. And part of what I try to do in my research and my work here is to try to uncover some of that hidden history and try to put to give it the light it deserves, and to have people make up their own minds as far as what is truth. And
right. Well, yeah, I get, it's really funny. I mean, I get calls here from folks and from everyday folks, from doctors and lawyers and PhDs and different folks, and they'll all say, I had no idea anything was going on. I stumbled across something on the Internet. And we have something going on, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he calls it the global political awakening. And they're, the ruling elite is quite worried, okay? We have the largest population on the world below the age of 25, okay? And a large amount of them are wired. Okay, and you have a huge gap of income between the rich and the poor, and I don't know about yourself, Ted, but when I look around and what I see in this country, I guess there's some middle class, but there's an awful lot of poor people and people that are just making it, from a couple paychecks away from being homeless to a certain extent, a large amount of the population, and I mean we've gone through a lot of stresses, and you see one thing that's going on, I strongly believe, is that the end game and where the ruling elite thought they were going to be, they thought they were going to be a lot more ahead of the game, but the personal computer and the Internet came along, and because, see, the Internet, even though, it was brought to us out of DARPA and all of this type of stuff, the whole culture, all of us socially together drove the Internet into something that they had no idea it was going to be. I mean, you can go back and look at the science fiction literature and all the different stuff, and nobody had really conceived exactly what the Internet was. And I mean, remember when it first started, you got these little mail programs, and they says, well, hey, you can send 8 kilobyte or 8 megabyte, or I don't know, 8 small little bytes, back and forth, and the people says, no, we want to send more, and so the whole, because see, basically, one thing that goes on, one of the dynamics that goes on, and part of that dynamic is going on in Egypt right now too. Okay, I mean these are test cases. Okay, one thing I found out in studying CIA drugs was, well, one gentleman, he was working for the CIA. He was at Berkeley. A trust fund gentleman, and the CIA was, interested in radical revolutionary cells, how all these things, about how all this stuff did, and they basically gave these guys carte blanche to do whatever they wanted, and they didn't do anything but basically just be a fly on the wall and watch it, and watch the dynamics and everything. Because, see, by understanding the dynamics of a situation and understanding, well, if I do something to skew the dynamics at this point, I mean, it's basically, sophisticated COINTELPRO. And so this gentleman later on, one of his jobs in the drugs was to be at the airport. He didn't meet anybody. He didn't talk to anybody. All his job was to do was to watch and make sure that the heroin that came out of the planes went from these one crew people and was transferred to the other people, and then it was his job to report that. But he didn't, he didn't have any contact with any of those people. But that's, kind of how these operations work. And so, one thing that they like to do is to do experiments and run, and get enough. If you get enough data, okay, then you have a much better chance of trying to predict what is going to happen, so that if your goal is to get A to go to B, you can get A to go to B. Okay, and because and see, in the other part of the dynamic, okay, is we have this huge world that's hidden behind the black cloak of the espionage. And you see, if you look at the structure of our government and of how the intelligence agencies have to interact with our elected representatives that are supposed to be the bosses, right?
Yes.
Okay, and dole out the money. Okay. Well, they've devised this thing where you have the House Special Intelligence Committee and the Senate Special Intelligence Committee, right?
Yes.
And then you have certain members on those committees that are then supposedly to be notified and told about these secret operations, because, the less they tell of these secret operations, the less people are going to know about it, blah, 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 right?
Yes.
And so they call it what, the Gang of Eight, okay, basically, that they have to tell, okay? And sometimes it gets down to a gang of 4, okay, on very super sensitive operations.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And my congressman here, Peter DeFazio, tried to get information. The two big black operations are continuance of government and drugs. Okay, and they're basically some of their headquarters are West Virginia and Arkansas. Okay, I mean, why? Would you agree with me that the Rockefellers are a wealthy family?
Absolutely.
Okay, and a Rockefeller can basically do what he wants to do, right? I mean, he can get up in the morning. He ain't looking at a clock saying, "God, I got to get to work to pay that bill at the end of the month," right?
That's correct.
Okay, so I mean, wasn't it grand of the Rockefellers to say, "Oh gosh, you people in West Virginia and you people in Arkansas, you need benefits of my governance," And that's because those are where you have a large headquarters of those two big black operations. Okay, continuance of government, where these guys have got a complete, separate president of the United States, cabinet, and a whole bunch of other, people living underground and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's nutsoid, but they've been able to use the fear factor of, the Russians have it, and blah, 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 and we got to do a blah, 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 all kinds of stuff. And, and there's some pragmatism there also. But, and then the other one is the drugs, okay? I mean, in that first book, Barry Seal, we wrote, Danny wrote the true story of Barry Seal about Mena, Arkansas, and the international airport in the middle of the Ozarks there, okay, which is still in operation today, which, you know, I mean, you see, they took the guy who was the the representative for Mena, Arkansas, and made him head of the DEA, and then Homeland Security, was head of border security, okay? And you see, in West Virginia and Arkansas, why there? Well, because they're cheap, they're easy to buy, and the second place is they're mountains, okay? And anytime you got mountains, okay, they're like autonomous zones, because you can go in the mountains and you can do what you want until somebody comes in there and tells you don't do that no more.
Well, I could think of moonshining as a good example of what you're talking about there.
Yeah. Well, it's and you had Jackson Stevens. You still have Jackson Stevens there in Little Rock. You know, they have the largest bond market outside Wall Street, and you can track. I mean, these guys. I mean, you follow the money and you follow the drugs and it creates this big corruption, and then they've got all this money. They got to figure. I mean, so what they start to do, in the late 70s and early 80s, they started getting into health care, and now we got health care. The price of it, I mean, you break your arm, and Lord have mercy, you're going to own, $15,000 to $30,000, if you break your arm in this country, I mean, it's ridiculous, and because these guys milk it and corrupt it, because once they're in the black thing, I mean, the savings and loan. I mean, you have Catherine Austin Fitz. I mean, she'll tell you about. Well, she got it down so that we weren't losing as much money in HUD, and they got her out of there. And now we're losing as much and more money, and it was going mostly to Colorado and Texas and stuff. And these guys got the system wired. They got it. They got it milked. And they do it through this and through this black side. These people who are members of the Gang of Eight and the Gang of Four, okay, they're able then to go up and set these because they are in the know. Okay, then they can set up these commercial fronts for intelligence quote operations. And then go do illegal things all over the place, and it's just a huge can of worms. I mean, you've got they use this the black operations is really big in California, okay, because first off there's a lot of people there, and then if you're going to have continuance of government on the East Coast, well, golly, you got to have it on the West Coast too, and you got to have it in the middle of the country, and blah 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 blah. So it's a big pork belly black project, and so I mean, we have situations like in California, they use from that standpoint to just do amazing things like the high-speed rail in California. I mean, how long have they been talking about that? How much money have they spent on it? They've given all kinds of state the ability to do bonds on it and all this type of stuff. It's never been built. And these people make money when these things don't get built. I mean, they got the corruption wired because, you see, at the end of the day, okay, it's the secret societal system overarching, that's the main instigator of the corruption, okay, and they've got their hands and fingers being able to do these little things, and they don't give a flying fig about the United States of America. Matter of fact, they don't really like a republic, and they don't like people like us all standing on our hind feet. They rather we stand in a different position, and so their end game is to rule the world through China, and they've done a pretty good darn job of taking our technology and moving it to China, and trying to dazzle our eyes, saying, "Well, you guys got this other clean technology here. You're going to make the hydro and blah 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 and stuff." And you know, but at the end of the day, okay, you know, I mean, we're all good people, raised good Christians, and so we don't like the Muslims and stuff. But the golden rule, you know. But you know, we're also through life taught another golden rule, you know. He who has the gold rules, you know.
Yes.
And you know, this a large percentage of the population wakes up in the morning, and their job is basically shoveling gold to China.
Yes, indeed. And you definitely state a lot of things there that are very important to me, because I take great pains to point out a lot of this type of thing on my YouTube channel, where I do videos, talk about the economics and politics and all of the different movers and shakers behind the scenes that really have a greater impact on what's going on in the world, and and what kind of raping and pillaging we have going on, primarily from people who are involved with secret societies and behind the scenes in clandestine services. And you know, speaking about that, maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about your dad and how his involvement with intelligence agencies, and how you came to realize that at least the CIA, for one, was heavily involved in drug operations.
Well, first let me say, you know, we've been extremely dumbed down. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, take a quarter out of your pocket and look at it, and it's got a slug in the middle of it. You know, I mean, we have no idea what money really is. You know, but okay, my dad, he was going to college, and he went as an exchange student. He spent his sophomore year in college at the University of Shanghai in China, and he left Shanghai the week before the Japanese bombed it. Went up to Vladivostok, went across on the Trans-Siberian Railway, went through Moscow, and ended up in Vienna, and then went through Switzerland and Berlin, and ended up at Oxford as a delegate to the World Council of Churches thing there with the Dulles brothers. And that's when he became involved basically with a intelligence gathering operation out of the State Department, basically debriefing and stuff, and you know, a simple way to debrief somebody is you have them write a magazine article and stuff like this. And then after he graduated from college in '39 and was scheduled to go to a school in, I believe it was Geneva or Zurich, or it was in Switzerland. And because the war broke out, and he'd gone to Washington, D.C. before then, and then he ended up working for COI in the basement of the Library of Congress, and the Librarian of Congress at that time was Archibald MacLeish, and he was also OSS. My dad was assigned to the Philippines desk and worked next to the gentleman who started what is now known as as a CIA World Fact Book, which was basically started on 3x5 cards and a little bit larger cards, index cards. And my dad became an expert on the Philippines, and then in 1943 he got involved in deep politics. They took him out of the basement, put him into the U.S. Army, gave him 2 weeks of training as a medic, because that was the least amount of training that you could get somebody through, and give him orders and send him on his way. and he was put into G2 and put in as a personal private secretary to a Dr. Hayden and placed on MacArthur's staff, basically to report back and to gather materials to send back to Washington about MacArthur and his aide Willoughby, what they were going on. And, and a little aside here, one thing that I found out, when you look into this, the more you find, and I mean, the closer you get to looking at, looking at a creek from a map and then looking at a creek closer up, you find interesting nuances. And we found that, Reagan and other people have hired other, private eyes and other people to investigate because, at a certain extent, these guys are, trapped in there, they're getting fed all this information and being handled, and so a lot of times they have stepped out and tried to, figure out, okay, exactly, what is going on here and stuff, because, sometimes, like Eisenhower. Eisenhower got surrounded by Harriman, some Skull and Bones people, and Eisenhower had been a general, he'd gotten corrupted early on by, he'd been in the Philippines early on, and he'd never put on his own pants. He had an orderly putting on his pants since, he'd been in the Philippines in his 20s. They told him, because Eisenhower would put boys on the beach, he'd given orders that killed people, okay? And these guys came to him and says, hey, instead of putting boys on the beach, we can put a couple spies in the thing and get the thing all taken care of. And Eisenhower said, well, gee, that's great, and you know what, and I don't want to know anything about it. And these guys, Harriman and whatnot, said, well, gee, that's just fine, Ike. And Prescott Bush, Eisenhower, where did Eisenhower come from, okay? In 1952 elections, the Skull and Bones boys were behind one of their own, Robert Taft, okay? But they were also very much into polling and all this type of stuff, and their polls showed them that Bobby Taft, it was going to be a cold day before Bobby Taft won. And all their polls showed that Eisenhower wanted in a walk whether he was a Democrat or a Republican. And the thing was, he'd been a military guy, so nobody really knew what he was. And so Prescott Bush got the job, and he talks about it in his oral history at Columbia that got released early. That he went over there to Ike and says, well, some of us are looking for you to be president. We want to know what are you? And I said, well, I'm a Republican. Didn't you guys know that? And so the very next week, okay, in came Harriman and Lovett and the Secretary of State, who wasn't a Skull and Bones, but he was a member of Scroll and Key, and but they were all Democrats, but they were there the very next week. And then it was Prescott who really put the deal together for Dick Nixon, and was the guy who suggested Eisenhower and Dick Nixon, because Prescott at that time was the head of the PGA, and golf was he was Eisenhower's golfing partner. I mean, the day Eisenhower left the office, Prescott spent an hour in there with him alone. And Prescott was Prescott was one of these people that was working in the black part that's why they didn't get in real big trouble for the union banking thing, okay, because they used their black thing and says, well, no, actually we're doing an intelligence thing, keeping track of these guys.
Yeah, right.
Which was a bunch of jive. Okay?
Of course it was.
But see that they get away with it, that and their ability to control the media even then. I mean, the I Paid for Hitler book by Fritz Thyssen was a cover-up story for that whole union banking thing, and was put out by John Chipferar, who was Skull and Bones the year right after thing. And I mean, and when you talk to Fritz Thyssen about this book after the war, he says, well, I know nothing about that book. I didn't write that. I didn't get interviewed for that book. It's it's a complete farce. And see, it was through that see the Bush people hid all their money. Okay, hid these shares of that bank, and then afterwards they sold those shares for big money, and that was the really big basis of the Bush's personal fortune. And then see, I mean, and Prescott was because when Harriman was gone, Prescott was running the Harriman brothers, okay, and I mean, and who gave the money for CBS? I mean, when Mr. Paley came from military intelligence operations of psychological warfare during World War II. I mean, he'd had his CBS radio network before, but then during World War II, he worked heavily with psychological warfare operations. He didn't have the money, but Prescott did, and Brown Brothers Harriman, and they raised the money for CBS, and Prescott was on the board of directors until the day he died. And whatnot. But let me see. I got off subject there a little bit.
That's all right. You mentioned MacArthur and Willoughby and how they were trying to get a back channel into what they were doing, and that reminded me.
That's what the OSS was doing with my dad, and then Dr. Hayden died. Okay, when he was talking in Washington. And had some talks with the president, and then he died. My dad came back, picked up the stuff that he'd had, and brought it back. And that was, I got to, in his papers there was a list of what he picked up, and that just really blew my mind, because when you look at that list, you see the depth and breadth of data that these guys are, looking at, and then so that gentleman died, and so my dad then took over a bunch of operations of running the guerrillas in the Philippines, and became very good friends with a bunch of the guerrillas, and the Philippines is very integral part to all of understanding of the secret history and what's going on, because the Philippines, has been a quote unquote, a Spanish possession since the 1500s, and then it was a back office to a lot of the opium smuggling, because a lot of these good English and Scottish and American families, of course, and they were asking their lifetime if they smuggled opium. They said, well, of course we didn't. But they would do something very similar to what intelligence agencies do today. You have a bunch of companies with the same name, but some of them would be headquartered in Hong Kong, some would be headquartered in Manila and stuff like that, and that's where they would keep their books and their opium trade. And the Philippines is where, through a member of the Order of Skull and Bones, William Howard Taft, he made opium illegal for the first time in modern Asia, because, see, after the Second Opium War, these guys lost their cash cow, and they were very, they learned that lesson very well. They learned that these, items have to be illegal, have to be prohibited, or they don't make no money. Okay, and we're not talking little money, huge money. There's a great book by Professor Carl Trocki, Opium in the Global Political Economy, that shows that opium basically gave us the control mechanism that the elites control us through today. The big pools of money for the insurance companies and the banks and all of this was developed out of the opium trade. and well, in drug trade, you have sugar actually being the first drug trade, and you can follow the same boats. Some of them would be involved in the sugar slave rum trade, and then they would be involved in the opium trade, then they'd be involved in the coolie trade, where they take Chinese guys out to the middle of the Pacific, to these islands, and let them mine guano till they died. It was just terrible. And then the last thing that these ships would do would be they would be gas tankers. But he started working with these Philippine guerrillas and went into Manila before the Japanese left and sequestered the puppet government's library and stuff, and got sued by the Japanese government for doing that. And then he became really good friends with the guerrillas, and MacArthur, his father, Arthur MacArthur, had been the first military governor in the Philippines, and then they sent over William Howard Taft, who was the first civilian administration governor, and it was. The shenanigans that got us in there are very interesting. You had Theodore Roosevelt was Undersecretary of the Navy. And see, the Roosevelts were involved in the drug trade heavily. Warren Delano, Franklin's grandfather, was chief factor for Russell and Company in Canton for about 20 years. The Roosevelts themselves owned boats and were ship captains. When the Secretary of Navy had gout, he went home early one day, and Teddy stepped up to the office and sent out a bunch of telegrams and whatnot. And the Secretary came back the next working day and said, "Hey, what'd you do, Teddy?" And never went home early again. And he basically had given some instructions to Perry, because if you noticed in the Spanish-American War, which had a very similar 9/11 type thing there, you had the Maine, which had been proven by one of the big admirals. I can never, it's either Rickoff or the other one, did a big study and found out that the thing had been blown from the inside out, not from the outside in. And they got through yellow journalism and all. They got the American people all hepped up into going to war against them bad Spaniards, because they were treating the Cubans really bad and putting them in concentration camps and blah 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 blah. And but when the war happened, when the war was finally declared, when the Maine blew up, the war was declared. We didn't go to Cuba right away. It took several months for us to actually go to Cuba, but we went to the Philippines right away. And the Filipino people had been fighting the Spanish. I mean, they had these old galleons there, and Dewey went in, fired a few cannons, and met the Filipinos at the beach and said, "Well, we got to take care of you, our little brown brother," and fought a terrible war. It's called the War of the Philippine Insurrection. It was basically the Philippine conquest. And then we put the Philippines in the hands of a very, very limited oligarchy, okay? And during the Japanese thing, the oligarchy basically were collaborating with the Japanese, and the guerrillas were basically the people, and they fought them. And my dad worked very hard and was helping the guerrillas set up a diplomatic mission in Washington and whatnot. Well, MacArthur came back and let the collaborators out of jail, and then a new gentleman showed up on the scene, a gentleman by the name of Captain Lansdale, and who basically they sent my dad out of there because we'd taken him back to the Philippines, and he was working with the people that they didn't like, so they got him out of there. He started working on research and analysis for the invasion of Japan. And the guy to take his place was this guy by the name of Ed Lansdale. And he started working with Lansdale then, and then also started, he went to Invasion of Japan. And then between VJ Day and Muster Out, they gave him a special assignment, and that was to investigate and find out as much information as we could about the Japanese use of heroin and opium in the years before the war and during the war. And he spent a long time in Shanghai, met with the Sung family and different things, and the Chiang Kai-shek, and because where opium became a revenue for quote unquote Western style government started with Chiang Kai-shek. I mean, and if you follow a lot of the drug trafficking in America, it's tied to that group of people that were working with Chiang Kai-shek and with the nationalist Chinese before World War II and during World War II. I mean, they go straight to Venice, Florida, and the Chennaults and all of that, and and you can follow Hell Will from there to the banks in the Caribbean and the whole schmear and then you can see where it's being shepherded by the secret society. They bring Bush in. Bush then takes the drugs, brings them under more of an aegis, and then they start in the mid '80s, start putting it to work, putting it in the stock market too, and stuff. And I mean, it's just it's a huge business. But so he did that report, and then went back to Washington D.C. Was in a couple alphas between OSS and CIA. Then was in CIA at its start. Rose to be branch chief, head of all of East Asia research and analysis, and that's basically you have a station chief like in Saigon, a section chief in Honolulu, and then the branch chief is in D.C. And then he went covert and got met on a street corner in New York City, got given a packet, and started an import business, started a book company in Jakarta. Was told that the reasoning behind it was that the communists are much better at printing books than we are, so we've got to go there to this new country of Indonesia. And I went with him as a little kid. Our family was basically a CIA front, at that time. And then we were there for a couple years, and he came back, and he worked various jobs. For a long time he was advertising salesman for a small newspaper, and then in 1956 he went on this trip to Southeast Asia. It was, we were told as children that he was going to be writing a book about the church in Southeast Asia, and it was going on as a mission type thing. And he, my mom went with him. We went to our grandparents' house out here in Oregon, and I mean, something very interesting happened in this trip because I was just a little kid, but very soon they came back, and things weren't the same. All of a sudden we were moving from D.C. area where they had bought this 10-acre farm, and they had plans to do all. I mean, we're going to be there forever. And all of a sudden, first we were moving to Rochester, New York, and then we were going to move to Rochester, Minnesota, and then nothing happened. And then the farm sold, and we stayed around D.C. for a while. And then he was working as a advertising salesman, and working for a senator a little bit, and then all of a sudden he became a vice president of a college in Tennessee, and we moved from Virginia to Tennessee, and then in Tennessee something happened, and the president left the college. My dad was asked to be president, and he said no, and and he moved the whole family out to the West Coast, and he started going to college himself. And then he didn't have enough money and ended up. My mom was teaching, and he had to start teaching too because he went from a fairly high government salary to another government salary. I didn't, I was 10 years old. It didn't mean much to me. I didn't know much what was going on. And but in this trip in '56, because later on after my dad told me some things, and I was looking into CIA drugs, I was very interested in the town of Chiang Mai in Thailand, because it's basically it's a heroin city. All the big banks have big major branches there and stuff like that, and it's very close to the Golden Triangle. And I'd been told in my lifetime that it had been a small village. Well, after my dad died in 1990, I was looking through his papers, and in there, this 56 trip, there he'd been in Chiang Mai. And so I'm thinking, well, gosh, I can ask my mom. She'd been there, about how big Chiang Mai is, And so next time I see my mom, I say, hey, Mom, how big was Chiang Mai? And she says, it wasn't very big. Probably the biggest thing in town was a church. We got some pictures of it. And so I'm pulling down her picture book, and she makes this little aside, and she says, and that's when I stopped believing everything I read in the newspapers. And I'm saying, Mom, what? I perked my little ears up, because Mom was a very good CIA wife. She knew nothing, and if you ask her questions, she wouldn't say anything. And after my dad died, these two guys show up the doorstep, say they're from this university, and say they'd like to go through my dad's papers, and she lets them in the door and says, sure, and so. So I say, well, what do you mean, Mom? And she says, well, when they had gone from Vietnam to Thailand, they'd gone to the Bangkok first and then to Chiang Mai, said the story in the newspapers was about this big battle in Vietnam, right where we had been. And she said there was no battle. We were having a picnic. And so I'm, looking at my mom's picture book, and yeah, there's a picture of this church in Chiang Mai, and it's a small little village, a town, and I turn it back, and there's, my dad, and there's, it says Colonel Lansdale, and there's my dad and Colonel Lansdale, and there's a bunch of pictures of these guys in fatigues and berets and stuff, and they're having a picnic, and there's this one just beautiful picture of my mother. I mean, she's just vivacious. Her skirt is swirling, and after I saw this picture later on, I showed it to my siblings, and it was picked as a picture for my main picture for my mom's memorial. And if you look underneath the skirt, you can see Colonel Lansdale there. Okay, and he's sitting down, and he's got a plate. They're having a picnic. And there's these guys, again, like I say, fatigues and berets and stuff, and then there's my mom's handwriting. It says, Eudora, okay, out from Saigon with Colonel Lansdale and North Vietnamese military leaders. Okay, and this is after, okay, Lansdale had taken over the Golden Triangle from the French, okay, and you can read about it in Gerald Posner's first book about the Chinese Triad, and he tells the story there about how this was one of the very few shooting wars between Western intelligence agencies, but after the French left Dien Bien Phu, their Secret Service and their Corsican gangster friends didn't leave the Golden Triangle, and Lansdale asked them to, and they said no, and so he went and got his own Corsican, Lucien Conan, and went up and shot it out and took it over, okay? And see, and this confirmed, because what my dad told me, I mean, he didn't start talking to me until about 1969. Well, there was this professor in the room, Dr. D.F. Fleming, and from Nashville, and what he told me, he says the Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it, And then he said, and communism's all a sham. These same sacred societies were behind it. It's all a big game. And I'm thinking at that time, Dad's nuts. I'm a teenager. I know a hell of a lot more than he does. And
right.
and I'm thinking that this is the late 60s, and I'm thinking he's going to break out into a drug talk and tell me not to smoke pot, And but he keeps on telling me about his intelligence career and ends up, talking about propaganda and psychological warfare and sway pieces and stuff. And it's, I have no idea what he's talking about, and have no frame of reference or anything like this. But you see, that's what the Vietnam War was. Okay, we had a volunteer army. They wanted to get rid of a volunteer army. Okay, because you can see the problems they're having in Europe in Egypt with a volunteer army, right? Okay, because if the army's full of conscripts, they want to get rid of a draft army. Okay, and they also, they were also out they were creating a drug culture. They wanted to create generational conflict and all kinds of things, because the conflict is and choosing sides. Okay, because again, why they had a picnic. Okay, but they told the world that we had a battle. Okay, well, why do you do that? And Lansdale, it's in the historical record. He did fake battles in the Philippines against the people, who my dad had been working with as guerrillas, and they called them communists and stuff. And then they would even go to the lengths of take a body and drain its blood out and spread rumors that it was a vampire bat, and stuff. And they call the guerrillas communists, and so so why do you have a picnic and call it a battle? Because then the people in the cities got to choose sides, okay? And then you provoke those sides and you harden those sides, Pretty soon you get shooting war, and then what do you get? You get American boys and girls going to hell, okay, for 1 year. And they knew they had to go to hell for only 1 year. They survived that, year in hell. They could go back home and go to the drive-in movie theater and see their girl or boyfriend or whatever, And guess what? Some of these boys and girls got hooked on the heroin. Okay. And because you see, I'm a hippie, and I know smugglers, and I know a little thing about drugs and whatnot. Okay. And I did a lot of research. I would talk to smugglers, and I found out that the CIA started working with the marijuana smugglers about 1962. And one thing about the CIA and the intelligence operations is they have a certain rhythm to them. They've got program, and because they've got supervised, they'll do something for a 6 months, and it's got to be reapproved, and different things and whatnot. And so they started in 62, and then about 72, if they hadn't turned the smuggling network into smuggling more of the marijuana, they started busting them. Okay, and by 77, 79, they had all the old boy, all the hippie networks, and all these things busted down. Okay. And they did the same thing in Australia and some other places, okay? And you find that they would do things like, okay, dry up the pot supplies too, and flood the market with heroin, okay? And they were out to create an opiated boomer generation, and it has to do with dynamics of our society, okay, and it has to do. There's a book that I can't recommend enough for people to read. It's called Generations by Strauss and Howe, and it's it goes back to the 12th century, and because see, we as a culture, as a society, have self-correcting devices. We aren't on a death trip to just kill ourselves, okay? I mean, we'd like to have, fun in the sun and make babies and continue on with the world, okay? And so the first fail-safe device is something that's just kind of dumb. I call it the dark hallway. Okay, it's also known to us as the dialectic. Okay, historical dialectic. Okay, basically, you walk down the hallway, dark hallway, and after a while you might bump up to one side. Okay, and then after a while you might bump up to the other side. Okay. And now the dialectic is easy to manipulate, okay, because it's like I say some things I know that are true about drug smuggling and secret societies and intelligence agencies. Well, I know some people that I know that are spooks, okay, and they say some stuff that's got a bunch of truth in there, but also got some stuff that's not true, okay? And some of them a little bit more outlandish, and then there's some spooks that even go more outlandish, okay? Because by controlling the extremes, you control the middle, okay? And you know, by what can be discussed, and I mean, it's like, see, you know, you can't even discuss conspiracy theory, you know, without being, you know, labeled, well, gosh, you're one of them, you know, and so that's a way of controlling the debate, okay? The next self-correcting device that we have is the cycle of generations. Okay, the Hindi talk about it, and other they show in generations how there was a generation that didn't cohere in the 1860s, and it basically relates to the Civil War and the assassination of Lincoln. Okay, and because of these mass trauma, If you know, you read Peter Levinda's Sinister Forces, one thing he shows in there how, gosh, there's people that are involved with the occult circles that are also involved with the propaganda and the psychological warfare circles, and gee, these rituals or, you know, these murders are happening on you know, particular moon cycles and the cycles of these years and blah blah blah. And you see, you know, and just the psychological effect of having a murderer run around and that fear and all of this, and, you know, there's advantages to the secret society system for them to do this rituals and these murder things, okay? And they when they got rid of that that generation in the 1860s, okay. Some of the people joined the generation before, some joined the generation after, and some just went out in the woods and did weird stuff. Okay, and then by making our social system weaker. Okay, but because that's what it does by taking one of those parts out, because there isn't that generation then that nurtures and stuff. Like I say, I just strongly recommend getting that book, Generations, for people to reading it and understanding it. And then by making us weaker than the secret societal system, okay, and they had the tools to do it with the drug trade. You had you know, one of the founders of Skull and Bones being the Attorney General of the Ulysses S. Grant administration, very corrupt. They use this money then to build the railroads, steel, build the AT&T, and then okay, let me see here. I was getting lost there. Excuse me.
That's all right. Anyway, give a nice recap of your dad's career there, and how eventually you came to get that talking to about the CIA being involved in drug trafficking, and also talking about secret societies. And I suppose that at some point this led you to your work at looking at Skull and Bones and the importance of that. And before you talk about Skull and Bones a little bit more, which I think would be a good topic for us to move into, I just want to say that what you're talking about when it comes to degradation of culture, certainly true in my estimation as well. This is what I have seen myself. And it has long been my belief that the CIA in the 1960s, with their proliferation of LSD, and then, of course, opium as well, out of Vietnam and the Golden Triangle, was an effort in their part to take the oomph out of anti-war movements, anti-government.
Well, no, they actually they wanted to create the anti-war movement too. Okay, because they created the hippies and the anti-war movement. All this is an antithesis. Okay, this was part of their creating sides. Okay, because
I could see that.
They didn't want the generations to be able to talk. They didn't want us working at all with our fathers. Okay, and they wanted us to pose. And then they needed that meme. They needed that radical thing to hang on to scare the rest of the population. But to go back to what I was talking about was when they got rid of that generation, it made us weaker, and they were able to get through the false progressive movement, okay, which gave first off they gave corporations personhood, and that was done through Skull and Bones. Judge Morrison R. Waite, who was class of 1837, who was the Supreme Court Justice, who with 2 sentences and with no debate gave corporations personhood, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Of course.
And then they got the false progressive movement in, which gave through regulation gave these corporations then limited competition and guaranteed profit. And then they got in the fake money, the Federal Reserve. Then they get the way to manipulate you more with the income tax, and then they got us involved in World War I, and then World War II, and did such things in World War II, such as, oh well, everybody, gosh, we gotta work together here to get this thing done. We gotta win and all of that. And we're going to have a victory tax. It's just going to be temporary tax, but I tell you what, guys, you won't even have to lick a stamp to send it in. We're going to go directly to your employer to get it. Okay, and that was the start of withholding. And at that time, that raised the people who paid actual income tax from about 20% of the population to about 60% of the population. Okay, and then they got in place. After World War II, they got in place a television and the modern education system, which you go back to the early 1900s. I mean, they put it in place through a Masonic structure, and the Masons were very proud of it. And this is what we're doing. We're bringing in modern education, and which was the Prussian education, which they found they took the classical education, taught it for an hour with bells in between. They could then create a false construct around us and move history on. So I mean, they dumbed us down, and then they sat us in front of a television, which is a technological means of mind control. The television patents go back to the 1920s. This Russian kid in Idaho saw the wind going across the wheat field and said, gee, I could make pictures on a cathode ray tube. And see, our system here runs at 60 cycles per second. You read any book on hypnosis, it'll tell you 60 cycles a second puts you in a trance, makes you believe what you're going to see, and puts alpha waves in your brain, makes you want to sit there in front of that TV. And if you look at where that is placed, that was only placed, okay, in the North American continent and Japan, okay? The rest of the world runs on 55 hertz, okay, and less, the CCAM and the PAL systems, okay? And it is a technological means of mind control. Again, because what they needed to do was they needed to harness and destroy the United States of America so they could do their end game. Okay, which was rule the world through China, and they've been you have fates. I mean, it's just like when in Kennedy assassination. Okay, you had 3 attempts to kill him. I mean, 2 attempts to kill him beforehand. You had one in Miami, one in Chicago, and then the one in Dallas. Okay. Now, the ones in Miami and the ones in Chicago were never meant to actually happen. It's classic intel operational. Okay, you feint. You always you want to find out. Okay, who's talking, who's taking tails to who. Okay, and you can only find that you can only drain the people out of the operation who are talking by doing feints. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the evidence is pretty strong that it was Lee Oswald that gave a big thing about the Chicago one. Okay, but those and so I mean, World War II and World War I and World War II were exactly that. Okay, and they were feints. Okay, because you see, you can't control the world through an iron rod by control. It just doesn't work. Okay, people work in cells, they work again, whatnot. Okay, so a perfect slave thinks they're free. Okay, and so that's the operation. I mean, and Skull and Bones is a Germanic secret society. I mean, golly, the House of Windsor. Yeah, right. The two oldest bureaucracies in the West, okay, the Catholic Church and the British monarchy, they're both in Germanic hands.
Yes, they are.
And that's and we're basically dealing with a secret societal system that's basically based in Germany, Brussels there, and is also sistered with one in China who has a little brother sister in Korea. Okay, they don't like Japan. Okay, and that's why they played Japan twice in 1905 in the Russo-Japanese War. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got Skull and Bones. I mean, they're loaning them money. They're at the peace table, and then they played them in 1945. I mean, the Japanese did all the dirty work in Operation Golden Lily. I mean, they stole all the gold and all the other stuff, but they didn't get to keep it. Okay.
Yep.
We've got people. Another book people need to read. Okay, and none of these books are the ones I publish. I mean, yes, people need to read my book, our books too. I mean, they're very important. Another book is Gold Warriors by Sterling Seagrave. I mean, it's an amazing book. It blow your mind. I mean, you learn history you had no idea. Okay, and Sterling Seagrave. I mean, he's the son of the Burma surgeon, a very well-respected author. All of his books were Book of the Month Club and New York Times bestsellers until he wrote Gold Warriors. He had to publish it himself, first off. There are some verso copies also. And he had to move to Europe because he got tired of the death threats.
Isn't that the way it always is? As soon as somebody comes across something that the powers that be don't want to see, I mean, they're persona non grata, even if they occupy a pretty lofty position to begin with. And it's clear. In your research into Skull and Bones and their origin, I mean, there's certainly been talk because it's come out of Germany as well. Is there any connection with the original Illuminati?
Absolutely. There's a lot of connections in the folklore of Skull and Bones, in the ritual of Skull and Bones, and in the beliefs. And then, what you have there at Skull and Bones is you have a New Haven was founded by a Calvinist, hyper-Calvinist, and Calvinist, I believe all men are wicked, and Christ only came for just them, and they were going to be part of the 144,000 who were going to be saved in the New World, and they came over there with a judge and a prophet, and only certain males could vote, and you had the 7 pillars of the community, and it was built on this square, and I mean you have these Calvinists, and then you also have magical principles that go there, and you had a very interesting thing that was going on within the Calvinist mind and with an ultra religious mind, in that when you are, reading a Bible and stuff that you believe is an inherent Word of God, and it tells you that witchcraft and magic is all evil, and then at the same time your culture is completely awash in folk magic, it sets up a dichotomy within the brain. Okay, and then you see the Calvinists that came to New Haven were hyper Calvinists. And hyper-Calvinists believe in a thing called the doctrine of reprobation, where they, along with believing that there is an elect in heaven, that there is an elect in hell, and that there's going to be God's helpers in hell that make sure that the devil's work is only such that that God can beat him and God can be God. I mean, it's nuts. Okay, it's absolutely nuts. And see, when you look at the history there of New Haven too, I mean, you see, both Yale and Harvard were started as Calvinist cleric schools. Okay, and to train Calvinist preachers. Okay, and then you had the Enlightenment that came in, which brought this huge amount of learning and classicalism, and also brought in a Western magical tradition, okay, which is very dualistic. And you take that and you mix it with the Calvinist, and it's basically you end up with with Skull and Bones, and you have when you have a secret society, just like any secret society, any place in the world, they're all the same sociologically. You have an outside group that in Masonic circles they're known as porch brethren. They're good for favors and window dressing and whatnot. Then you have an administrative cadre, because at any time in any organization you have the people who turn the lights on and turn the lights off. And then you have a core group, and that core group are always all related. They're cousins. Skull and Bones is built around the Cabot family, okay, with a very strong subset of the Whitney family, and then the other subset is the Baldwin family, and going back to King Baldwin of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem,
and their if you look at their lore, they believe that they are part of the Knights Templar. Okay.
That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. They would claim this as well.
And the interesting thing is you see the Skull and Bones logo. Okay, I have copies of that logo older than Skull and Bones, and they were being used by a Masonic Knights Templar, and there is one Knights Templar organization in Canada that still uses that particular thing. But so they believe that they're part of the Blue Bloods. I mean, they're special. Now, why are the Blue Bloods blue? I mean, what's their cachet?
Well, I guess it's history, genealogy.
Right.
They
say that they're related to Christ. They're related to the House of David. Okay?
Yeah, that's where the English monarchy
nice
is there.
Way of saying that you're related to Christ, so bow down to me or something,
Exactly.
And so they believe that they're special. And I mean, anytime you get into genealogy, one thing that you find is anytime you get usurpers or whatever, they always create their own their own genealogies and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, you get back in time and I mean it's but that's that is a lot. That is their dynamic. And basically, when you look at Skull and Bones, basically they are an operational lodge, okay, that practices death magic. Okay, I mean straight from their symbol and other things. They've been known as the Brotherhood of Death, and one thing that they do is they create a lot of guns. I mean, it's just amazing in a straight line, right up from what we call the tomb, which they call their temple. Okay, straight up through there, through this boneyard, is the factory that built all the Browning automatic rifles for World War I and World War II. Okay? I mean, they believe by creating death, okay, they get power. Okay? And from a pragmatic standpoint, okay, we had a member of the Order of Skull and Bones in office in 2001 there, okay? Yes. And you know, by killing 3,000 people, look at the power they got. They got the power to take this country, 300 million of us strong, to war.
Absolutely.
You know, and a Christian war.
Yeah, right.
You know, I mean,
that's the real joke.
You know, and you know, I mean, and 9/11 is a classic mind control. I mean, you've been in an airplane. We've all been in airplanes. You know, we know there's, you know, a couple hundred people on there, and you might not know the people next to you, but there's a camaraderie on there, okay? And you've been in an office building. We've all been in office buildings, you know. I mean, people get up, go to work, go to the office building to, you know, pay little Johnny's braces bill or whatever, you know. I mean, and so you've got, you know, these altruistic souls, you know, getting killed, you know, and what happened on 9/11? You had a whole country looking at, you know, these tubes going back at 60 cycles per second, you know, watching a plane disappear into a building over and over and over and over. I mean, I can't say how many overs that we all saw it. Okay,
that's true. Mm-hmm.
And that's classic mind control. That's I mean, that's trauma. That's trauma. Okay, yeah. You know that there are people dying. Okay, you know that people are grieving because their loved one died.
Mm-hmm.
You are grieving because an American died. Okay,
yes.
And where did this American die? They died in this symbol that they worked so hard to make the World Trade Center this big archetype of, well, that's America, the World Trade Center. You know, it was in all of these movies, all, you know, all. I mean, they made, and they worked very, very hard on building that archetype up, only to smash it down. Okay, so then they can build it back up little, because you can make little pieces into something different than what the original thing was, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I mean, that's how these guys operate, you know. And they give us threats behind there, you know. Well, you know, I mean, and then we get the anthrax thing, you know.
Yes.
And you know, and where does the anthrax go? I mean, it goes to Democrats, okay, and it goes to the media people and the tabloid people, you know, to remind them, hey, you remember, you guys, intelligence money started you guys, and you guys are part of the intelligence operation. You can't tell any truth about this, you know, and they won't tell any truth. I mean, you know, Daniel Hopsicker's story of a man, Muhammad Atta's girlfriend. She's a pink hair stripper. I mean, we had you know, the stringers from down there saying, oh yeah, it'll be in there next week. Yeah, stripper bears all.
Terrorland.
It never ran.
Yep.
You know, because I mean, think of the intelligence operation and the ability to play with America's mind every week at the supermarket. Giant dwarf eats yellow tomato, or you know, whatever.
Yes.
Okay, it's a great way to play with America's mind. Okay, make you think, well, gosh, this stuff isn't real. Just because it's written doesn't mean it's real. And all I mean, it's, you know, we're dealing with psychological, very, very sophisticated propaganda and psychological warfare. Okay, and you know, and it's got to stop, because, you know, I mean, the amount of effort and crap that happens because of, you know, their actions is just, you know, the pain that they create to sit in their seats is terrible, and there's no reason for it. There's absolutely no reason for it. We have all seen our planet from outer space with the internet. You know, we can all you know, I think we could all live here much nicer and have a. I mean, just think of the world that we could have here if there weren't all these people trying to, keep war and fear alive.
That's so true. That's so true.
I'm going to have to run here.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
No problemo. I'm really glad that you spent some time with us here, and I really appreciate your insights, and you'll give me enough to continue with the rest of the show, and I'll be sure and plug your website and everything, and of course Trine Day Books. And again, I want to thank you, Kris, for joining. Thanks for joining me.
I'm sorry. I thank you, and yes, and people do go to the website, do buy. I mean, these books are. This is vital information that we need to know to understand what is going on, so that we can stand up, and that's all we simply have to do is stand up and take back our republic and get rid of this corruption and go on.
I agree, and part of that is to root out these secret societies, and you're doing a great service by continuing to do that, Kris. So thank you very much, and thanks for joining us today, and maybe I'll have you on again in the future, and we'll talk some more.
Anytime, and if I can help getting any of our authors, let me know, and you take care, and God bless, and all of us. I feel really good, and I think good things are going to happen.
Yeah, well, I'm like eternally optimistic too. Okay.
It's good to talk to you, Ted.
Yeah, you too, Kris. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay. Bye. Okay. Well, Kris had to leave us there. Anyway, lots of things to talk about. Kris, of course, as I mentioned in the introduction, Kris founded, along with a couple of partners, a couple of friends of his, founded Trine Day Books. And you can find Trine Day at trinedae.com. That's TRINEDAE.com. And I mentioned a few of the books that were being sold by them. And, of course, one that Kris himself contributed to, Fleshing Out Skull and Bones, and we did talk a little bit about Skull and Bones there. And what I wanted to go into a little bit more, had we had some more time with him, was how much the occult does influence these secret societies and how they use it in their efforts to control the world and to do all the things that they do, like the insidious behind-the-scenes actions of these groups with governments and with the media. And, of course, you heard him talk about how the television was originally designed to be sort of like a mind control weapon on its own. And I think that is a very true point. If you look back at the history of TV, you can see the hands of various people involved there from time to time, and I think that looking at this from the perspective of history, like we've done here, and look back into the past and see how, like with the British East India Company and the subjugation of China to opium and the opium wars that resulted from that, and then the founders of Skull and Bones getting their money primarily from opium production and sale, and then moving forward to our time right now, where you quite obviously have intelligence agencies being involved in the sale and distribution of drugs. And I talked about Gary Webb in a previous show when he talked about the CIA introducing crack cocaine into inner city communities. And, it was kind of a stupid joke. They investigated themselves and found that they did nothing wrong. They weren't importing crack cocaine. And they weren't selling it in the inner city in order to make money. And you have to think about this. The covert operations of intelligence agencies and secret societies themselves are in need of tremendous amount of funding in order to keep doing what they're doing. And they can't have it all on the books because it just simply can't be supported. And I think that whenever you create cast-offs, whenever you create branching ideas and ideologies and branching compartmentalized secret operations that continue to branch and branch and branch, they create their own momentum, their own self-sustaining momentum behind them, and they all have to be funded some way. And part of the way they are funded is by drugs, by drug selling and by drug distribution. And of course, we see right now, up to the present day, we had in the past, and Vietnam was a perfect example with the Golden Triangle, with heroin being shipped back to the United States sewn up inside the corpses of dead American soldiers. Okay? And this was all orchestrated out of the intelligence agencies in this country. Okay, and now we have a so-called war in Afghanistan, which is supposedly a patriotic endeavor to go against the quote-unquote nefarious terrorists, And what are we doing over there? A lot of our soldiers are guarding poppy fields so that heroin production can continue and that all of this heroin can make its way onto the market and be sold. And where does all that money go? If we're guarding the poppy fields, we have to be getting something as a result of it. That has to be a basic thing, a very basic understanding. You have to realize that if you're doing a thing, there has to be some gain you're getting out of it. And that's why we're doing what we're doing there. And I say we, meaning the people that run the government, not the people of the United States. It's a very small point, but it's something that should always be said whenever we're talking about these types of actions, is that when we say we, we're not talking about we the people, we're talking about the we that controls everything from behind the scenes. And there's a very powerful force behind the scenes in this country. And Kris touched on this very prominently in his discussion on it, and that is secret societies, their connection with the occult, tracing themselves back through genealogy, and considering themselves to be special. And this is what the elites who run the show behind the scenes feel about themselves. So, the contrary to that, if they are the special ones, then what does that make you and me and everybody else? That makes us not special, which means that we're what? Expendable. We're expendable assets if they choose to view us in that light. And this is exactly the way we are moved about. We're moved about like chess pieces. We're moved about in a way that we are used as assets, and we're expendable assets. And that brings us all the way around to the idea of population control, population reduction, and this whole idea about Agenda 21 and about the Georgia Guidestones, keeping us down to 500 million people population because we need to have enough resources for what? Enough resources for the future of humankind? No. Enough resources for the elite, so they will never run out. So you can't have 6 billion, 7 billion people on planet Earth perfectly fine, living just fine, not running out of resources, living their lives as they would any day, not being slaves to somebody, You can't have that because they view it eventually all of these resources will be dried up. And since they consider themselves special and above all other human beings, they have their own agenda, and that is to get rid of all of the useless eaters, and that would be all of us, so that they can live their lives with their longevity potions and their technology to prolong their lives. And whatever people who they decide to leave, after they get rid of the vast majority of us, those will be the slaves for the elite themselves. And they will do the bidding of their masters just like we had in the Middle Ages. And this is exactly the type of scenario that is being played out here. And, of course, Kris mentioned also the idea of trauma being committed on the populace, and this is a big part of how you create things within the minds of the people. And one of the biggest modern acts that you had was the Kennedy assassination, which was blasted all over everything, showing him quite clearly, getting his head blown off in public in front of who knows how many thousands of witnesses down there in Dallas, but also via the television set as well, over and over and over again. This is a tremendous trauma on the people of the United States, and it's meant to create schisms within the mind. And if anybody listening has any knowledge of MK Ultra, you'll know that a lot of what MK Ultra survivors talk about is trauma programming, and they introduce trauma into people's minds. That is a way to create schisms in the mind, and then they can create alternative personalities within those people. And it's a way of sort of splitting you off from yourself. And this is a way that they can control people by keeping people from being directed on things outside of their own mind. And that's part of the reason why there are so many different groups and why these so many different groups can't ever come to any kind of compromise and join together to fight against the forces that are working against humanity behind the scenes, because there's an internal schism that's existing in all of our minds, because we've been inflicted with trauma and we've been used and abused like an expendable asset. And what do we have to look forward to in the future? So more of the same, because the economic situation in the country and in the world is very depressed. We see people on the rise as far as protesting goes. But you have to also realize that while all of this is going on, there's a very strong behind-the-scenes element here that is trying to manipulate and control outcomes of everything that is going on. So I think it's very important to realize that secret societies and the people that are in them and their connection with the occult and their idea of gaining power via control over people and via, as in Skull and Bones or the Order of Death, by creating death, by creating misery. And I think that this ties in with the occult connection very strongly, because it's my view that a lot of the secret societies, Skull and Bones will be included in that, and some of the elite groups themselves conduct occult rituals and are involved in the occult in an effort to gain power from entities outside of our dimension, outside of our realm. And I talked about this before. And some of these creatures, some of these beings, some of these entities that exist outside of our dimension that these secret societies and cultish groups are trying to contact and gain power from, they desire fear, mayhem, and all of the other negative emotions, because in some way they're able to feed off of it, for lack of a better word. I don't know if feeding is the correct term, but I think you can understand what that amounts to, basically. And fear is a great driving factor in all of this, and fear of things unknown is one of the greatest fears of man. And don't you think that the bogeymen that are always paraded before us are people that are hidden away somewhere or outside of our ability to perceive them quite clearly? You know, even Osama bin Laden, who is clearly dead and has been dead for years, never appears in any place, never shows up. He's always just a nebulous force lurking somewhere, waiting to strike at any moment, like someone hidden from the shadows. It's fear of the unknown. And then, of course, fear of the unknown prevents people from taking steps to change things in a positive way, because there's the possibility that could be sidetracked or railroaded off into something not so good. So you look at what you have and it's not too good, and then you think, well, if I work to try to change this and get out of this mode towards something better, I mean, there's a chance I might fail. And then what's going to happen then? Oh, a big unknown. We may end up worse off than we were before. And it's that fear of the unknown, the fear of change, that is a great way to control people. I have someone on the line here who was on the line from the beginning of the show, and I don't know whether they called in to listen or if they had a question or a comment for the show. So I'm going to see who this is and check on that. So hang on a second. Hey, are you calling in just to listen to the show, or did you have something you want to contribute?
Oh, I was just kind of listening there. I got knocked out. Just trying to get to listen to the good parts here. And maybe it was being messed around with.
I don't know. I saw you were on right from the very beginning. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have anything you wanted to contribute to the show. I thought you might be calling in to listen. So you want to just hang on the line and listen?
Yeah. How long do you have?
We got 18 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe I'll have a question. I'll raise my hand.
All right. Are you in the chat?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I'm on the phone.
All right. Well, hang in there.
I will. Very interesting.
All right. Okay. Thanks. All right. So, well, good. Thanks for calling in, caller, to listen to the show. I'm glad that you're taking the effort to follow my show, even via the phone. So I appreciate that very much. I appreciate your attention there. But we could go on with this entire idea about the occult and how the occult is such a vital part of the control matrix that's above us, the people behind the scenes, and how much the occult is being used as a tool by these people in an effort to gain some power over the people of the world, in an effort not only to hoodwink them, in an effort to hide the truth from them, but also to control outcomes and to control behavior and to eventually bring about a completely new society. And as Kris said quite clearly, it's more of a Brave New World type of scenario that we're going to be looking at in the future, rather than a 1984 type future, in my opinion, because he's absolutely right. The slave that thinks it's free is the best slave of all. And when you have the jackboot crushing you under its heel forever, like George Orwell talked about, there is inevitably going to be struggle against that. But when you have the Soma blitzed masses of Brave New World, there's much less of a resistance to this, because the people feel as though they are doing what they want to do. They're free to do what they want. And I think this is the future that we're looking at. It may not be exactly like the Brave New World, but something very similar. Yes, it is an interesting connection that he brought up between Skull and Bones and Calvinism. And I think it would be important to note right here, my particular take on religions in general is that for the most part they're meant to be control functions on society, and they're also meant to be repositories of so-called hidden and arcane information. And religions run by priesthoods have been on the scene for ever throughout the history of humankind. And if you look back to the time of like the pyramids in Egypt, you can see that the people who had the knowledge and the power and the ability to build the pyramids and to do the things that they did were a priesthood unto themselves, and they were the ones with the knowledge. And all of the religions that have come out of that time have continued this idea of hidden and secret knowledge. You think there's no coincidence why, like in Roman Catholicism, that you have an intercessor between you and God in Roman Catholicism. You have the priest. He's the middleman. He's the guy you have to go to. You can't just go to God yourself. It's just like in ancient religions. The mystery religions were the same way. You had a certain formula, a certain ritual that you had to perform in order to be able to approach God, to understand the mystical, to understand, your place in that relationship, and to even, come before God with any kind of questions or whatever that you would have. You had to perform these very functions, these rituals. And if you look at any religion, there's ritual involved. And there's also this idea of hidden and arcane wisdom that can only be gotten from the priesthood of the particular religion itself. And there is also a dogma associated with all of them. And the dogma decides what is important for you to be involved with, and it also gives you so-called guidelines for how you should live your life. And a lot of this is also very pertinent to us as people in society, because there are strong inclinations within all religious groups that we should be obedient. You understand? Obedience. And who are you obedient to? Well, you're obedient to your so-called spiritual leaders, but you're also obedient to others who occupy a position of what? Authority. So, religion breeds the idea of a assent to authority figures, whether that's on a spiritual function or in the material world itself. And this is why I say that religions are used as controlling mechanisms, the religions themselves. Now, that is not to say that people cannot have honest and true faith in whatever particular deity they choose to believe in and have faith in. And I certainly wouldn't tell people that, if you believe in God, don't do that. Or if you want to follow a particular religion, don't do that, only in the sense that you need to realize what you're doing. You need to realize exactly what's happening, and you need to realize that the mechanisms that are in place are meant to control you to a certain extent. So don't just accept where you are, but always question where you are and come to a conclusion about where you are, and make that with your eyes wide open, rather than just accepting something that someone tells you or that you you receive as so-called received wisdom from someone in an authority position, whether that be spiritual or within our material plane, and that would equate to government. So what do we have? We have most people who do belong to established religions, and for that reason, we have most people who are subservient to authority figures, because this is the mindset that is planted in people who are raised in a religious environment. So, and drugs come into play here in a very real way as well. And we were talking about how the CIA was involved in drug trafficking, and Kris brought up something that I had not heard before. That the CIA was involved with marijuana traffickers as far back as 1962, presumably to get their cuts in on it, and eventually, as he said, they purposely dried up the marijuana market in order to flood the market with heroin and opium derivatives, so that people would end up drugged out on the harder stuff. When marijuana, in comparison, is rather mild compared to heroin and opium derivatives. Person can function high on marijuana. It's kind of hard to function too well when you're doped up on heroin. And again, what's your particular take on, drug use and everything else is one thing, but I guess, from the lesson that he learned where his dad had a talking to with him, Kris and his dad, Kris had been smoking some pot, I guess, which is like what just about every teenager goes through at some point in time. And his dad was mad at him, not because he was smoking pot per se, but mad because he was buying pot, and because that money was going to the intelligence agencies and to the secret societies that are behind them. And it has to be a personal decision on your own whether you want to, partake of any particular drugs. Just, be intelligent about it. I personally, I'm completely of a libertarian mindset when it comes to drug use. Whatever you want to do with your own body is your own business, and I think that's the only way you can really be. Because if you take up a position where you want to tell somebody what they can and can't do, it's just gonna spiral down into a mess of control, and it's not going to be a really good thing at all. So it's a very interesting discussion that we had here with Kris today, and he talked about a lot of different things and gave us a lot that we can think about, I think, with the history of Skull and Bones, and even another thing, which is a very interesting point that he brought up about how the corporate personhood actually originated with a decision by a judge who was a member of Skull and Bones. I didn't realize that before. And then, of course, there's a lot of talk about today, whenever you talk about economics, you talk about political situation, you talk about how our nation has been dismantled, and Kris talked about this quite clearly, that China is being set up as the staging point for the end game, if you want to call it that. And all of our technology and everything had been given to the Chinese, and they've built themselves up to be the manufacturing and the powerhouse of the world. Because we decided to do that here in America. The powers that be here decided to do that. The elites around the world decided to do that, and this is something that was planned. But there's talk that trying to explain why corporations and businesses in the United States would want to leave this country, and trying to blame it on the fact that in the United States we have too much regulation, and it's too difficult, and our taxes are too high, and all this kind of stuff, and even that the government itself creates monopolies and perpetuates them, and without government regulation would have real free business, and everything would be able to go and would have a real quote unquote free market. But if you look back into the past, you can see the freewheeling days that he was talking about, when corporations were deemed to be a person. That in those days you had the rise of Standard Oil, and you had Carnegie, and you had J.P. Morgan, who virtually owned everything in the entire country, and there was no regulation against this sort of thing. There was nothing. So to say that governments promote monopolies or that government regulations somehow create the problem is just hooey as far as I'm concerned. It's just, if you take a minute to think about it, you can see that it's clear that there is a place for regulation, and it's not because of regulation that companies decided to move overseas and to destroy this country. It was simply a matter of greed. Simply a matter of greed. And part of the idea behind the intelligence agencies being involved in drug trafficking and all of the other nefarious activities that they're engaged in to create money, to create wealth for themselves, to fund their programs, and in the further pursuit of that is also greed. And you have to realize that greed is not just about money, it's about power, it's about a lot of other things. It's about controlling whatever you can and as much as you can. And greed goes deep into these secret societies, and greed is a very big part of occult indoctrination as well. You have to realize that a lot of the rituals and everything else that are conducted are conducted in an effort to gain something, and usually these things are being done in a way that is driven by greed. And without regulation, you have rampant corporate destruction of the world, and the free trade agreements and everything else, and greed, which caused all of this to move, and it was all designed to happen the way it did. But like Kris, I am optimistic. I'm very optimistic that we're coming to a new phase, and even as he pointed out towards the beginning of our talk together about Brzezinski talking about global awakening, the elites are very afraid right now, and they should be, because we have the potential to move in a brand new direction. And if we can just keep control of that and actually do it, we could put them in their place and take our rightful place as real live human beings, living our lives without fear, in pursuit of our own dreams and desires and destinies, and have real relationships with each other, and enjoy all the fruits of what it means to be human. So I'm very optimistic, and I think that can be accomplished, but we need to fight for it. So again, I had today, we're almost done here, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, we had on today Kris Millegan. You can look in the description box on the episode page to find where he has a blog. That's at milliganstews.com, MILLEGANSTEWS.com. On there he has forewords to all of the books that he publishes through Trine Day. You can find Trine Day at trineday.com, TRINEDAY.com. I highly recommend you go over there and have a look at the books that they have there. You're sure to find something that you're going to like. The Sinister Forces series, which I can't recommend enough. I have also The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, Dr. Mary's Monkey, very good story. There's a book on the Franklin Scandal by Nick Bryant. Kris Millegan has been around the block a few times. He's been in this game for a long time, and I'm very happy that I had him on the show today. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and for joining us here, everybody in the chat. And also want to remind everybody that you can find me here Fridays, 7 to 9 p.m., and sometimes special showings on other days to accommodate guests who can't make it on Friday. And you can also find me on YouTube, user Tenebrous T, TENEBROUST. And my show on YouTube is also called The Stench of Truth, where I talk about politics and economics and rant and rave. But stay tuned here. My next guest is going to be Christopher Knowles next week on the 11th, 7 to 9 p.m. We're going to talk about modern myth and pop culture. So tune in. See you then. Bye.